All right. Well, welcome everyone. This is our first financial aid workshop of the semester. So we will offer two more. They'll be in April and May. I think both are in April actually. And they'll be in person. So you can always come again if you need a refresher. And again, we're recording this so you can always watch it again. But this will be an overview of the financial aid process and how it works for studying abroad or studying off campus. It is very much of like an overview in the sense that we're not going to get into specifics of what this could look like for you. Each student's aid package is different. And so if you have specific questions, it's helpful to meet one-on-one with myself and Darren, but really with financial aid because they know your aid packages and can go into more depth about what this can look like for you. But hopefully this will give you an overview of how the process works. So tonight, we are going to cover kind of a timeline of what we're doing now to prepare for students going away in the fall and academic year. We'll talk about what a cost of attendance is, what some of the pre-departure costs, so costs that come up before your program starts. We'll talk a little bit about financial aid policies, billing, payments, scholarships, some budgeting tips, and then we'll do a wrap up and also some contacts of who you should reach out to if you have questions. So we're thinking timeline wise. Right now is the time that you're applying to your programs. And when you apply to programs, you may have to pay a deposit. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as well. Before May 1st, you want to make sure you complete FAFSA. For international students, I think that's the acronym for international students as well, the CSS profile. Make sure that you are applying as you normally would, like you're going to Bates. You do not need to apply as though you are studying abroad and you're going to Bates. You're just applying like you normally go to Bates, and then Bates adjusts your financial aid award based on your your study abroad program. So make sure you still apply for FAFSA like you normally would. Right now, and in the upcoming couple months, we are working on your cost of attendance calculations, which will outline how much the program will cost you specifically. And I'll go into more depth about that. And then usually, like you normally get your award letters, should come around June, maybe early July, but I find that most of the students who are studying abroad are usually the first ones that they'll try to get their awards out, and it tends to be early to mid-June. If you needed an estimate award letter before then, we can always do that. It's just based on your financial aid award this year and not next year. And typically they do change. So it's more helpful to wait until June, July. But if you want to get an estimate for this year, we can always work with financial aid on that and just let me know. And then in September, your financial aid is either distributed to you or your program. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. But your financial aid isn't actually available to you or sent to your program until the start of Bates classes. So don't expect to get the aid in advance. There are some exceptions to if you need to dip into your aid in advance, we can talk about that. But otherwise, aid is available when Bates starts. So what's this cost of attendance I've talked about a couple times? For each student who studies abroad, I put together a cost of attendance specifically for you, for your program. So I look on the website. So this is a made-up student called Bobcat. He's doing the Arctic Studies program. And I've gone on the website and I've looked up, okay, how much does tuition cost for this program? How much are students charged for housing? Some of you might be going on programs where the housing charges vary. I try to find an average. What on average are students paying for their housing costs there? How much you need for food? How much you need to grocery shop and feed yourself when you're away? Are there any mandatory fees? Some programs charge for specific fees that are particular to their program. I look to see, are there any mandatory fees I'm missing that need to be added? Is there an application fee? Do you need a visa in order to go? Do you need a student visa? How much does that cost? Well, you'll most likely need international travel. I don't think any of you are studying anywhere too close to take a train or a bus, but that could be the case. But I look up average flights. So I actually go into our system, look up where your home city is, what's the closest airport, and I try to find an average of what your flight is. We do a general number that Bates uses, which is $450 for books and supplies. Some additional personal expenses doesn't cover everything, but we try to think of some additional costs that may come up. And then a Bates off-campus study fee, which I'll talk a little bit more about later, but that's charged to students who are studying off campus to stay enrolled and connected at Bates. So when I put together this cost of attendance, I'm really thinking holistically, what is this program in this semester way going to cost you, not just what the tuition and housing is. So I send these cost of attendance sheets over to financial aid, typically before May. I've really kind of talked about this previously, but to break it down a little bit more, we include the Bates off-campus study fee. That's 7% of the single fee. So this past year, it was 2,988. This upcoming academic year, it will be based off of the single fee, which we don't know yet, but I'm assuming it's going to be around $3,000. If you receive financial aid, up to that amount, it's part of your financial aid package. So you typically don't usually need to expect to pay at debates, but it really depends on student-specific awards. And if you get less than $3,000 for financial aid typically, then that might be something that you need to pay out of pocket. But we do calculate it in your cost of attendance. We also calculate, as I mentioned, tuition, some mandatory fees. Uh, if you have, sorry, I'm just moving my Zoom thing. Oh, and your program deposit. If you have a deposit that you're paying to your program, it is something that you pay up front, and we'll talk a little bit more about that, but we do calculate it in your award. We consider housing and food estimates. Average housing, we're not looking at the penthouse suite that's overlooking a beautiful view of the city. We're looking at, on average, what's the basic housing costs. We do not cover independent housing, and students should not be doing their own independent housing when studying abroad. You should be, excuse me, going through your program or your university. If for some reason there is no housing available at your university, which we try to avoid, then let us know. We'll talk about an additional independent housing in those cases, but otherwise financially does not cover it, and we really require students to go through the program housing. We calculate some personal expenses, some books and supplies. It's really not going to cover all personal expenses. Tell students if you are going out to dinner every night, you're going to the clubs every night, like that's going to really add up. That's not what we're budgeting here. We're budgeting for some basic personal expenses. And then round trip transportation to and from your program, your visa application fee. This includes some estimates for some local travel, but not all. It does not include costs to travel to your visa appointment. Some of you need to go to Boston to get your visa. We unfortunately are not able to include travel costs in your cost of attendance for financial aid, so that is something you want to budget and plan accordingly. Um, you may also have to pay for your airfare or visa in advance, and we'll talk a little bit about that later. But if you get significant aid, if aid covers everything here at Bates, there could be a chance that you could dip into your financial aid in advance to help with your airfare or visa fees, but that's a case-by-case basis. So when in doubt, if you have a cost that come up, you're not sure if you can cover it, reach out to me or Darren. We can reach out to financial aid and see what's available ahead of time. And if you are going for a full academic year, we do consider 2 round-trip flights because there are some programs that don't cover housing in between terms. And if that's the case, please get in touch with your with your study abroad program now so you are aware of whether or not you have housing in between. But we do want to make sure that you are able to financially afford to come to your program and back if you need to in between terms. Cost of attendance calculations do not include everything that you may need for study abroad. So we want to make sure that you're aware of what they do not include. Students who decide to go through a program provider that we don't recommend. So IFSA is one that comes to mind. There are some universities like Queen Mary University. They're great going direct. There's really no need to go through the extra program provider, but there are some students who really prefer to. If that's the case, we want to just make sure the students own financially know that additional cost to go through IFSA isn't covered and included in your cost of attendance. So if you think you're in that kind of situation, please let us know. We can talk about it. But there are some exceptions like King's College, UCL, where kind of going direct can be challenging. So we really do encourage and recommend students to go through IFSA. So that would be an exception. So if you have any questions, please let us know. We do not include in your cost of attendance passport application or renewal fees for your passport. As I mentioned before, any travel costs that come up with your passport or visa application, including any biometrics. Immunizations, any vaccines that you might need to get for your program, that's not included in your cost of attendance. Personal travel, if you decide to travel on the weekends and explore, that's not something that we calculate for. And as I mentioned, we calculate for some personal expenses, but not all, not everything that you're going to spend when you're away. You do want to work this summer and see if you can save so you have some additional spending money. Not all on-site commuting. We try to get an estimate of what students pay for some on-site commuting, but it's not going to cover everything. And break housing, as I mentioned. So if you're there for a full year and you have a break in between, reach out to your program, see and make sure that you have housing. And if you don't, what's your plan? And you want to plan accordingly. And then additional health insurance. So some of your programs in their tuition, they automatically include insurance, but for some of you, you may have to get health insurance in addition to your health insurance at Bates, and that's not something that we would calculate in your cost of attendance. So if you have questions about that, let us know. All right, so I wanted to give an example for a specific student. So let's say Bobcat was studying abroad in this Arctic Studies program. And after I calculated all of the costs and their cost of attendance, we came up with a total of around 32,000. Financial aid creates your financial aid award based on that number. So if you go to Bates for a semester, it's near around 43,000. So you may see that your financial aid award is less than what you normally get at Bates. It's because your program, even after adding up the additional costs like airfare, food, some personal expenses, visa costs, it's still less than Bates. And so the number that stays the same is what you pay or what your family or what your net price, what your, it used to be called EFC, what your family contribution is that you pay to Bates every semester. So if this student paid to Bates every semester $10,000, and I'm telling them that their program based on this cost of attendance sheet is going to be 32,000, that means Bates would say, okay, we still expect you to pay $10,000 because you normally pay $10,000 to Bates every semester. So we'll give you 22,000 in financial aid because the total number here is 32,000. Your family contribution is 10,000. So your financial aid award would be around 22,000. This is an example. I don't want to get too much in the weeds because every student's financial aid package is different. So if you have questions, if you want to see your cost of attendance, I can certainly share that with you, and then you can meet with financial aid to get an idea of what this could look like for you. Again, your awards are not going to be out until June or July, but they can give you an idea of what your award would be based on this year to give you kind of a sense of what that might look like. I'm going to hand it over to Darren after this, but I will talk a little bit about pre-departure costs. So, as I mentioned, there are costs that come up before financial aid is available in September. That usually includes deposits, can be for tuition, can be for housing. Some of you that may be going to universities, I think of Queen Mary, this comes up almost every year. There's like a 600-pound deposit that you have to put down within 48 hours after you've chosen your housing. Comes up. So we want to make sure students are aware, they're ready to put down the deposit. If you want to ask for an advancement to help cover that cost, it's going to be really hard to get that money to you in 48 hours. So you want to plan accordingly and see is that something you can financially do now and get an aid later. Another pre-departure cost that comes up before aid's available is airfare. Booking your flight. You might be booking it sometime in June, July, August, May. So if you need to book your flight and you need to get your aid in advance, ask. We can see if it's a possibility. Similar with your visa and residence permit fees, those come up in advance as well. You may need a financial aid award for your visa application. And so you want to make sure that you give financial aid in our office of at least 4 or 5 days in advance before your appointment. I actually just had a student email this morning saying, I'm going to my appointment tomorrow for something. Can you get me a letter? I was certainly able to, but what if I was out, and Darren was out too, or something? You want to give yourself a little bit of time. So make sure you ask for those things in advance. And then additional pre-departure costs come up, visa appointment, travel costs, if you need to renew your passport, and as we mentioned for immunization. So these are things that come up that you might need to pay for within the next few months. All right, Darren, I'm handing over to you.
All right, so Jen covered a lot, and so some of this will be repeats but in different ways. So this is some important financial aid policies that we think you should know or be aware of. So we talked about the off-campus study fee, which is 7% of the single fee per semester. And this helps us offset the costs and services and resources available to you while you're away. You're still an enrolled student while you're away. you've got access to almost everything on campus. Your email still works. Like, this is the only cost that's going to Bates. Um, in terms of deposit payments and withdrawals from programs, so in the event that you're moving forward with study abroad and you confirm, maybe you paid a deposit and you're like, actually, I can't go. Chances are you're not getting that deposit back. And some programs may have additional financial obligations that you would have signed off on. For example, one program that we know of has in their financial policies that if you withdraw from the program within 30 days, maybe 60 days of the start, you owe a quarter of the tuition. So that's a lot of money. Can be a lot of money. So there's a few of those like that. They'll also just additionally have different financial policies than Bates. So when you get to that point where you get some of that information from them, take some time to look through it so you know what's going on. In particular, what if you withdraw from your program once it's started, you may not get any sort of refund for that, and that would mean that Bates also doesn't get a refund of your financial aid. So you're still out on that cost. Um, Hopefully it's not a situation you have to deal with, but it does come up every once in a while. We're talking about financial aid, and those are meant for your educational costs. Unfortunately, I have had some students in the past use their financial aid for other costs that they were not supposed to, and then they ran out of funding by the end of the semester, and Bates can't support you in that situation. So keep a good budget, which we'll talk about, and make sure you're using your financial aid just for your educational costs, which includes like your living costs, but gotta be reasonable. Jen will do the cost of attendance once. It's not continually updated. If there are major changes, like I don't know, housing totally changes, or the dollar crashes or something, maybe they'll be updated. We'll see how things go in the world. But usually they're not. But they're not continually updated. Jen talked about the net price before or in the last slide or two slides ago, so I'm not going to go over it again here, but should be about the same. Good thing about work study is that if you have work study eligibility, which is indicated on your award letter, Bates converts that funds to a Bates grant. So you don't have to work and you still get the funds. Some programs do have the ability for you to work either through the program or through a scholarship program or even in country, but it is not common that you're able to work in the country you'd be studying in. Usually your visa is meant only for study and does not have work rights. Not true everywhere, but majority true. And financial aid awards are up to the bait cost of the bait single fee. And that's per semester. So if your program, it doesn't usually come up in the fall, but sometimes in the winter, if your program costs more than a semester at Bates, you'd only get financial aid up to the cost of the bait single fee. Okay, so some billing and payments things. These things will start coming up as you get accepted to your programs, because I know you've all been really good at applying to your programs, right? Yeah, uh-huh. Um, if they're asking for payment before financial aid is dispersed, ask them to delay. You don't need us to get involved for this. You can do this yourself. They're used to it. They know what U.S. financial aid is, but you just have to identify that you will be receiving financial aid. Some of them will be easier to work with than others, and we're happy to get involved. But most of the time, if you just say, "Oh, I received financial aid, I'll get it later," they're like, "Oh, great, here's a form," or "Okay, we'll keep track of that." And by form, I mean you fill out the form. Can't cover the initial deposit, similar to asking for payment. A lot of programs or schools will delay the deadline or include it later in your bill. If that doesn't work, just reach out to us and we'll see if we can do that in advance on your financial aid. When you start getting bills and invoices, which could be anytime from, I don't know, May to October, really, they are all on different timelines. So that's why we do this, because they're all so different. Send them to Heidi Bassan. Heidi Bassan works in Student Financial Services, and she's in charge of student accounts. And she will actually be the person that is either releasing financial aid to you, or in some cases, able to pay the bill for you. Um, but the bills will always be initially sent to you. That's our agreement with these programs. You will get them directly. Even if they do come to our office first, I will resend it to you and probably CC Heidi just for convenience. But you need to have a copy of it as well. Next, scholarships. Okay, one of the reasons we moved this earlier is because we noticed that students weren't applying for scholarships. If you're receiving financial aid, chances are you're eligible for some scholarship. We've got them listed on our website at this link, which Jen will put in the chat at some point. Yeah, we'll figure that out. We'll put in the chat. There's also like a PDF cheat sheet, so it's great to look through. There are stipulations, of course, Marine must be receiving financial aid in most cases. Some do stipulate that you have to be a US citizen, depends on where the funding source is coming from. Most of the program providers like SIT, IFSA, CIEE, all the acronyms have their own scholarship program, and you should absolutely apply for those. Like, I know you have to write like an essay or two, but really, it's like free money. And most students get something from them. But don't wait. The longer you wait, the smaller the pool of funds is. And so you want to apply early for those. That's one of the reasons we ask you to apply so early compared to when these deadlines are. Um, yeah, so scholarships apply for some of the more competitive scholarships are like national ones. Jen's looking for the link or she did something. She's also on mute and talking to me. Um, so one of the more competitive ones, work with Jen or myself. Some of their deadlines are passing, or I think one of them's tomorrow, the Gilman. And they have particular requirements. So Jen will also reach out to you to let you know, like, oh, you're eligible for this, you should apply for this. This deadline is coming up. So we'll try and get you to apply for them too. Once you get away or abroad, and I say abroad because this grant only covers for international students who are outside the US, you can apply for the Barlow Host Country Cultural Enrichment Grant. Barlow is an endowment that has been outlined to help students in terms of participating in off-campus study. One of the portions of this allows students to apply for an on-site opportunity to further explore your host country. So this is within the location that you're going. It's up to $500 as long as funding is available, and the funding always runs out. So you'll want to apply early once you have a good sense of what you want to do, but you can't apply until you get into to your host country. And what was I gonna say about it? So some examples are some students have rented instruments to play in an orchestra or a band, done bike trips through Scotland, attended oddly expensive football games, and by football I mean soccer in their host country. Just some things that you might not be able to do on your own because you don't have the funding for it, but with this $500, it makes it possible. Does not apply to the SIT independent study project period, though. Um, a note, if you do receive an abundance of scholarship at a high level, it can impact your financial aid from Bates. It also depends on how those scholarships are being reported. So I forget there's a sort of a better way to describe that, Jen. Do you remember how that is? Like if it gets to a certain point, it's pretty
Yeah, I
rare,
think,
but it can happen.
right. Like I think if it's more than what you pay to Bates, then it might impact your aid.
That's what I
And
was looking for. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Um, and I think too, if you have questions about that, you can reach out to financial aid. But there are some scholarships that I haven't seen impact aid, and knock on wood, that's a good thing.
Yep.
That
All
might
right, what's
change.
next? Budgeting tips. All right. So one of the things about studying abroad is that you have to budget, especially, if you've got a tight budget and you're receiving financial aid, like, things are going to look different. Most of you are going to be in a city. You're going to have commuting costs, different types of food costs, and things are just going to cost different. So a good website here is Expatistan. It's a cost of living calculator and does comparisons. Um, Lewiston, Maine is not in it, but you can put in Boston as a comparison or to another city you know well, and then do either the city you're going to be in or one that's close to it. And you can see the differences between like, okay, what does an average taxi cost? What's a lunch meal usually like? Keep in mind that you'll also be doing some conversion with the currency. Some of you are used to this already if you come to the US as an international student. But so that's something you'll want to get to know as you get closer to departing for your program is, okay, how much is the US dollar worth in this country? Study the paper money, even though sometimes you don't actually use it. Jen gives the example of, I think when you went to Sweden not that long ago, you used only her credit card the whole time. And that's, I think, is becoming a bit more common as well. If you don't have a credit card at this point, I would recommend you get one. You are a student, so often you can get a credit card with a better rate, and it helps build up your credit score over time. But certainly look for one that doesn't have international fees, because then you could use it while you're traveling for study abroad as well. So look into those. We don't necessarily have any recommendations. Um, if you do have TD Bank and you're an international student, we want to work with you to make sure that's going to work out. Sometimes TD Bank is not so happy about being used internationally, but it seems to really only be if you're not a US citizen. Um, but we'll send you another message about that in the future so you can prepare for it. Best recommendation we have is like keep track of your initial spending and then multiply it out by the rest of the weeks you're going to be there and see if you can afford it and then cut back if needed. I just heard from a student who went to Ghana and he was like, oh my gosh, I was living large with my money because the dollar went so far. And then I've talked to students who have gone to London and we're like, oh my goodness, like I was eating rice and broth. Like it's a big difference based on where you're going to some of the costs of living in different places. So keeping track of the spending can help you figure out what you're going to need for the whole semester. Look for student discounts. Your Bates ID may help with that. If you don't know how to cook, that's one of the things you should be working on now. Learn how to make 3 meals. And then when you get there, make friends and see if you can do some like group cooking. Travel local, one of the biggest costs students talk about. And when they come back, well, they'll say it was really expensive if they go to Europe. And then they'll say, oh, what did you spend money on? And it was traveling every weekend. I'm like, oh, well, that wasn't part of your study abroad program. That was because you wanted to travel every weekend. So look for ways to travel local on a bus, on a train, explore the city you're in and the city next door. And let's see, we're gonna move to the next slide, and I'm gonna share a budget sheet if I can figure out how to upload it into this chat.
And I also just put the scholarship in. Sorry, I didn't know if I could open a window before and look it up, but
Okay.
figured that out. Um,
So we won't go through this like line by line, but this is what I just put into the chat, and it will also be uploaded into your Global Bobcats account soon. It's a basic worksheet of like how to develop a budget, and the initial steps you might want to take. I know some of you are like, yeah, I've been budgeting for years. I know how to do this, but I also know that some of you have not. And Commons, while it's lovely and takes care of all your food needs, is not realistic in the rest of the world, where you're probably going to be, making breakfast at home, bringing something for lunch, figuring out dinner. So this can help you think of like, okay, what are your daily costs going to be? What's the exchange rate? How do I add up all the personal costs, cell phone plan, entertainment, like everything I want to do? And then it also has links to some of the things we talked about already. So take a crack at that. It's not a homework assignment, but if you want to go through it, we're happy to go through it with you. So to summarize what we talked about, so we talked about cost of attendance, how that's calculated by obviously Jen, and share with financial services, that you get your financial services award letter directly via Garnet Gateway in June or July. Um, your financial aid will be allocated to you and maybe also can pay your bill directly when possible, and that would likely happen in September. And after your bills or invoices are paid, any remaining balance is available to you so that you can pay for costs related to being a student in the place you're going to be. And those you request through Garnet Gateway. So these are your contacts and what we're helpful for. Heidi Bassan, Jamie Terrio, and Audrey Burns in Student Financial Services are all available to you. They couldn't be with us tonight because it's sort of a late night, but they're friendly and available. You also all have a financial aid advisor that you can find out who it is on their website. It's by last name, or if you're an international student, it's Wendy Glass, because she works with all the international students. So you can always talk to them as well. And at some point, I definitely suggest you get to know them. Is that the last slide, Jen? I think it is,
that
right?
is, this is it.
Okay.
Yeah. Now we're
Okay.
open up to if there are any questions. And I know sometimes students leave this and they're like, wait a minute, what does this mean for me? Again, meet with us one-on-one, talk to your financial aid advisor to get a better sense. It can be helpful to talk about this specifically with your program costs and what this could look like. So hopefully this gives you an idea of the process, who to reach out to, an overview, but reach out if you have any kind of one-on-one questions. But we can also, I'm going to stop recording and we can open up for any general questions.